En este momento,
the Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Lenin Moreno Garcés, President of the Republic of Ecuador. I request protocol to escort His Excellency to the podium.
en nombre de la
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Lenin Moreno Garcés, President of the Republic of Ecuador, and to invite him to address the Assembly. You're very welcome, Your Excellency, and you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, friends. Everything in life is cause and effect, and every effect implies a cause. Human beings, we have a tendency to scour the past, to try to find comparisons, to predict the future, because we are unavoidably part of this chain of causes and effects. Those who govern, leaders, the decision makers, we have an immense responsibility in the way the world perceives its future. Our nations must understand that causality is not fatalism, quite to the contrary. Peoples have the force, the strength to change their surroundings. For this, the international policies that take root here in the most important global forum must help us empower our societies. It must help us to understand history as something that we can change. Policies are successful when they strive to address the individual histories of every single individual, in particular those who are the poorest, those who are left behind, those who need the most, because we are nations, we are united nations, we're united to change the history of peoples. Our plan of government, by the way, is entitled A Whole Life, because that is precisely what we are and what we do. A whole life to living, to get it right, but also to make mistakes, to dream, to build, to love. And for us, those who are here, it is up to us to analyze and to cope with the consequences of this. The plan is called A Whole Life because we want to be attentive to the human being from the moment he or she is conceived until their passing, when God closes our eyes. And depending on the time, moment of the person's life, this being attentive can mean caring, it can mean encouraging, it can mean motivating, supporting, and expressing gratitude. Caring and encouraging perhaps are part of the first phase of life, to care for the mother, for the child, both before and after birth, and to look after the child during his or her first 1,000 days of life. That is a mission that we call a mission of tenderness. Then, of course, comes the next stage of encouraging children to enjoy, to play, to study, to be happy, to teach them to love science, to delve with passion into the technology. It's true, it's important to study, but it's perhaps even more useful and edifying to be creative, to love research, to let your imagination soar, to challenge yourself with technology, to constantly cultivate values, and never to stop playing and experimenting with colors, with sounds, with aromas, with textures, with tastes and skills. Now, after comes the next phase of motivating, to to provide young people with knowledge that will serve them for their future in their professional life, to encourage them to be entrepreneurs based on a strong dose of self-satisfaction, make sure that their future is more straightforward, less complicated, that they learn to love life, discover what is beautiful in their surroundings, so that they're never forced to seek satisfaction and security in foreign substances. Now, we should encourage them with financing, with greater participation, to encourage them to trust their capabilities and their dreams. Now, support, that perhaps is more for the adult. We support the adults to find jobs, to shore up their family, to make sure that their projects take flight, to have social security and individual security, and what's important for their family to have a roof over their head. This is a mission that we have called a home for everyone. And then there's the last phase of gratitude, so that our elders can enjoy their latter years in the knowledge that they live in a society that is grateful for everything they have done, that they're surrounded by love, company, and care, so that these years are truly their best years. Someone asked me once, what gave rise to this thinking? And I answered several times. Perhaps, I answered. Yes, perhaps. Perhaps I was born and I lived as a child in the Amazon region, in the lungs of the planet. I was born in the heart of the Amazon region, the lungs of the planet, in the most mega diverse tropical forest in the world. There I got to know the deep-rooted problems of those who are abandoned, how precarious life and health can be without even minimal coverage for human beings. Many children there died, and many mothers perished with them. Now, in the framework of this General Assembly, we will examine two fundamental topics at the highest level regarding in the area of health. That is combating tuberculosis and the onslaught of non-communicable diseases. It is my desire, the commitment of all, and in particular of Ecuador, that these discussions give rise to agreements and commitments to concrete actions. It is scandalous, unjust, and immoral. Scandalous, unjust, and immoral, I repeat, that access to medication that can save lives often is limited because privilege is granted to intellectual property and profits of major pharmaceutical companies instead of the right to health that every individual has. It is this kind of discussion, that the UN takes on meaning, that is based on the daily experiences of the citizens of the world. The more we in the United Nations strive to touch the lives of people, the stronger we will be as we face the future. Now, perhaps also because after many years of playing in the neighborhood where I lived, surrounded by supportive neighbors, I learned the value of community life. We came and went into everyone's house. Our neighbors cared for us. We helped each other in any circumstances. Together we celebrated individual achievements. In fact, the ideal of peace and a shared life was at the very origin of the United Nations as well. We cannot forget that this should be the venue where we discuss major problems, large problems and small, among countries. And as part of this discussion, we should encourage countries to engage in constant dialogue, standing reciprocity, encourage them to strengthen multilateralism, to listen to each other, to engage in dialogue. But what's important, and I want to underscore, to hear those who find themselves in situations that we want to examine, deal with, and resolve. Another perhaps when I was young, I looked at my situation and compared it with those of some of my friends who had excellent ideas, but they didn't have neither the knowledge nor the ability to carry through on their endeavors. And so we experienced the anguish of not having startup capital for our businesses, and we spent long nights before paying monthly bills, trying to invent where to get the money to meet our obligations to our employees. We learn from personal experience not to allow others to underestimate us for being young people. We learned the decisive role of private initiative. We understood that entrepreneurship is a value that generates wealth, jobs, well-being, self-esteem, and freedom. Today, the private sector on the global scale is more aware of its role. That role goes far beyond simply profits, production, and jobs. Today, large, medium, and small businesses are interconnected in thousands of ways, and as they understand their role in providing well-being in their daily actions, they can be essential actors for global efforts to promote peace and prosperity. Bearing this in mind, as I was saying, bearing this in mind, we must live up together to the commitments that we have undertaken as part of the agenda for sustainable development. And the notion of partnership is an essential part of that agenda. Perhaps, because 20 years ago I was assaulted and I lost the movement of my legs. As you can see, I get around in a wheelchair. Is this bad? I don't know. A Chinese saying says that everything is neither that bad nor that good. It's bad because when I came home after the hospital, this was very hard. There were no IV drips or painkillers, only a constant pain. And I remembered Francis of Assisi, who spoke of pain my brother, because I experienced this kind of pain and even stronger pain. And now, perhaps because I see from this wheelchair, I see through the eyes of the heart. When you have legs, you look ahead of you and above you. However, when you're seated in a wheelchair, you see horizontally and you see below you. And you discover other realities, other worlds. You see those who only encounter barriers to move forward, to continue, including even to be able to live. Barriers of different types: mistreatment, xenophobia, racism, injustice, machismo, inequality. In other words, to sum it up, exclusion. This story is not only my story, it's the story of billions of people around the world. Madam President of the General Assembly, this is one of the most important topics that will be examined, is precisely the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The implementation of these rights, of the Convention and its optional protocol, is precisely what will help us ensure that together we will live up to a commitment that remains pending. Bearing this in mind, it is a great honor for Ecuador to exercise in the next 2 years the presidency of the Conference of States Parties of the Convention. Now, from this forum, we will ensure that promotion and protection of individuals with disability, that we step up our efforts to do that, to make sure that we increase accessibility, so that we become a truly inclusive United Nations. And we're not talking about only physical accessibility, but also so that individuals with disability and their rights are taken into account in all discussions, resolutions, and initiatives of the United Nations. And perhaps as well, because now, just as in the past when I travel in my country and around the world, I see exclusion and injustice. We exclude those who are different, who are poor, who are older, who are young. We mistreat women, girls, indigenous women. There are so many brothers and sisters who are abandoned and forgotten. And there are so many people who walk right by without even noticing them. As member states of the United Nations, we cannot allow that because of laziness or inertia, because of that misery and injustice, remain a part of our everyday landscape. That is precisely what Sustainable Development Goals are aimed at. These goals are an essential part of our program of government, The program that I just want to repeat is called A Whole Life. Perhaps also because it's clear for me that during our whole life we must be happy, and it's precisely for that goal that we govern. We are in a great country here. Its Declaration of Independence of the United States. Its famous second line, written by the great Thomas Jefferson, with contributions by Adams and Benjamin Franklin, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End of quote. The pursuit of happiness. This declaration inspired, amongst others, the Constitution of this great country, which is a global reference in scientific research and development. For this, and perhaps because we always very attentively follow events around the world, we don't understand how a country such as this can blockade an almost defenseless nation such as Cuba. It is almost impossible for us to understand that you prevent others from having the right to their rights, to life, to freedom, and to the pursuit of happiness, that you prevent them. And also, perhaps because we were idealistic young people, because we continue to be rebellious, we don't understand how major powers spend on weapons instead of investing in the development of nations. We also don't understand how these countries that have achieved such a level of development and superiority in weapons prefer to see their sons fight in wars, intervene in foreign conflicts, instead of resolving them. They aggravate them and perpetuate them. Perhaps also because when bankers and those who were unscrupulous robbed the pockets of the people of Ecuador, when they made entire families poor, when governments instead of caring for the poor and the needy, they do everything that's quite the opposite. In Ecuador, we are receiving daily at least 6,000 of our brethren from Venezuela. Children come with diphtheria, with polio. Women who are pregnant have never had any kind of medical control. We have provided 50,000 vaccines for these children, and we have provided medical care for some 1 million people who've left their homes to find a better future. This is the largest diaspora in the history of our continent. We have urged the government and the people of Venezuela to resolve their crisis the way it should be, on the basis of a national dialogue that is frank and inclusive. We also encouraged just recently the neighboring countries of the region to take on practically and in a comprehensive, holistic way to express support for migrants and displaced people and refugees from Venezuela. We cannot allow, we cannot simply make diplomatic statements. We want continent-wide efforts to find a solution, including a structural solution to the problems of the brethren people of Venezuela. I want to underscore that no one emigrates because they want to. They're forced to do it because they're uprooted, and because often it leads to dismembering of the family, which is very harsh and painful. José Martí, the Cuban poet, said, when a people emigrates, there are too many. Those who govern them are useless. So we express solidarity for those who come to us, and we invite all those who are migrants, who left our country, to come back to their homes, to reincorporate to our family, national family. In July, we approved the Global Pact of Migration that will be adopted in December in Morocco. We cannot allow this pact to remain a dead letter. We have to become aware that inclusion has no borders, that the right of every individual to life and happiness does not end where mine begins. Both rights are fundamental rights of the human being. They're interdependent, and they enrich each other in their interconnectedness. Now, regarding the crisis in Venezuela or the crisis of Nicaragua, our Latin America has a huge challenge of consolidating democracy, given that various countries have authoritarian, corrupt, and populist governments. The history of the United Nations is the history of a common pact to preserve the human rights of the citizens of the whole world. Rights can only be guaranteed in the framework of solid institutions with broad freedom of expression, with a transition of power. These are fundamental elements of strong democracies, and our nation should be committed to building these democracies, to caring for them, and my government has maintained its democratic commitment in each one of its actions and decisions. It has maintained its commitment with the original ideals of our United Nations. Kofi Annan, this great man who left us so many lessons, such important lessons, said, in the face of the growing cynicism about democracy, we cannot give up. Rather, we need to defend and advocate for the values and virtues of democracy. End of quote. Madam President, dear friend, Maria Fernandez Espinosa, you are the first Latin American woman to preside this assembly. Ecuador would like to thank for this the support of brethren nations for your election. We are aware of the immense responsibility that you have at the head of this global forum. We all are in favor of seeing the UN be relevant for our nations. We are the organization that brings together our nations in their concerns and in their aspirations. We see the international effort that the UN is making to care for our children, for our neighbors, for ourselves. For this, we support its disarmament plan. We support the Global Migration Pact. We're promoting the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in addition to an innumerable list of actions, commitments, and decisions, the United Nations is our organization. If there are flaws in it, we should correct them. Let's not try to take it apart and dismember it. Let's not take away funding from it, because we need to strengthen it for the future. So we want to leave a strong UN for our futures. If we're going to create additional complementary organizations, that we can do to, for example, support trading systems or specific projects, regional projects in the area of culture, education, or sports. All these are welcome, but the ultimate goal should be to strengthen the global union, to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, and all the historic commitments that we have undersigned. However, we don't believe, nor should we use regional organizations to defend outdated, perverse, and dictatorial systems, as we've seen born and unfortunately die in the last few decades. Colleagues and brothers and sisters from around the world, this institution is the most important living symbol of the global commitment to peace. For years, we've spoken a lot about peace. We've spoken at length about peace, but no one has been able to do better than the definition of Gandhi regarding its condition as the sole path for humankind. Peace is our greatest right. It's a sine qua non condition for life and happiness. Ecuador has serious problems on our northern border, in particular with international crime and drug trafficking, and we are dealing with this with the president of Colombia. We have committed ourselves to putting an end to this, and as each cause will have its effect, and each effect will continue transforming itself in another cause, we know that World peace is a duty that remains pending because it hasn't yet taken full root in the heart of every human being. As a father and a grandfather, I know that and there won't be any peace unless we inculcate values throughout life. We know that, for example, civility is not simply an issue of public interest or honesty or transparency. It's not a topic taught in schools but in particular it has to be inculcated in the heart. And unless we do that, we will never create the groundwork for peaceful coexistence. As someone who comes from the Amazon region, I know that there won't be any peace unless we preserve our planet. We must make the Amazon not only the lungs but the heart of our planet. As an individual with disabilities, if there won't be peace, there won't be peace unless we have inclusion and we celebrate diversity. As a president, I know that peace is ultimately the option of preferring the poor, working for those who need it most, making sure that everyone without exception are free to realize their dreams every day, every single day throughout their whole lives. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Ecuador for the statement he has just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the head of state and the rostrum is prepared for the next speaker.